Hi, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. I'm sorry to be late. Something weird happened. I got an error message on my computer saying the traffic was unexpectedly high and try again in 30 seconds. That's a StreamYard message. I'd never gotten that game before. And I kept trying every 30 to 60 seconds since 8 o'clock. It now is 8:08, and I am finally live. Anyway, it was a technical glitch. I don't think it had to do with my computer at all. I think it originated from StreamYard. So that's what caused the delay. My topic for tonight, well, there are three topics I'm going to talk about. One is civil asset forfeiture. The second is AIPAC's loss in Maryland in a surprising race. I'm sorry, there are four subjects. The third is that someone very prominent in the human rights area who was reluctant to declare genocide, that what was going on in Gaza, was genocide, just did finally say, it was genocide. The gentleman involved is someone who used to be a good friend of mine when we went to college together at Cornell. We were activists, together, and we were among those who started a new period of activism at Cornell in the years 1959 and 1960. So anyway, we'll talk about that. And then the final topic we'll talk about is that it looks like it's make or break for the climate over the next few years, but starting right now. So I'm going to talk about all those things tonight. I see I have 3 comments at this point. Dolores says, hello, everyone. Lana says, hi. And Dolores says, hello to Lana. So there are some other folks here as well, but they haven't identified themselves as yet. So I'm going to begin with the first of the pieces we'll discuss, and that is about civil asset forfeiture. I picked this piece up in Portside. It originally appeared in The Nation. It's by Elie Mystal from May 12th, 2024. The headline is, the Supreme Court rules that cops can steal your stuff, as they always have. By a 6-3 vote, the conservative justices decided that there is no need for the state to provide a preliminary hearing in civil forfeiture cases. And there's a poor lady. A woman sits in her car, which police had seized for a crime she did not commit. The photo is by Nami Y. Ha, and it's an AP photo. Quote, civil asset forfeiture is the legal euphemism for when the cops steal your stuff. In this country, if you were stopped, or arrested, the police can take all the personal property you have on you and call it, quote, incident to the arrest, unquote. That property can include your phone or your legally purchased guns, and it almost always includes your car. I've always thought this was totally outrageous. Never happened to me, but In most of America, the car, your car, is an essential thing to have. It represents the freedom to go where you want to go, when you want to go. It's an essential part of your personal freedom, okay, or liberty. Of course, technically, when the cops take your car, they're not necessarily they're taking your liberty, okay, away from you. I mean, if you have enough money, you can always go out and buy another car. But for the poor and for the lower middle class, it's not just infuriating, okay, and rage provoking. It leads to very serious results. Going back to the article, when cops decide to help themselves to your property, they can do it without a warrant, without securing a conviction, without even charging you with a crime. Once they've taken it, the cops can then force people to engage in a long legal fight to get their stuff back. Often the value of the property stolen by the government is less than the cost of lawyers needed to fight the government. That certainly would apply in my case. I have a very old car. It's a reliable car. Can't afford a new car. So that would be it. I would be up a creek, okay, without a paddle. Certainly don't have the money to pay a lawyer to fight the government. Going on, there's no right to public counsel when the cops steal from you. So most people can't afford to fight them, never get their stuff back, and the cops end up selling it for a profit. Civil asset forfeiture is a booming business and has become a key source of income for some cities and entire states. According to Policing for Profit, quote unquote, a report from the Institute of Justice, federal, state, and local governments made $68.8 billion from civil forfeiture between 2000 and 2019. That, of course, is more than the congressional appropriation just made for helping out Ukraine. In the Ukraine war, that was only $61 billion. Most people I know think that civil forfeiture should be unconstitutional as a point-and-click violation of the Due Process Clause. The Fifth and 14th Amendments both say we should not be, quote, deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Civil forfeiture is literally depriving people of their property with no process at all. Unfortunately, most people I know are not on the Supreme Court. On Thursday, the 6 unelected Republicans who rule this country said that civil forfeiture can continue to happen so long as the government eventually provides a hearing, even if the hearing takes place long after the theft and most people can't afford to appeal. The case is called Cully versus Marshall. It deals with 2 straightforward civil forfeiture examples from Alabama. Halima Cully loaned her car to her son, who was stopped and arrested while driving with marijuana. Lena Sutton loaned her car to a friend who was subsequently busted while driving, with methamphetamines. Alabama cops seized both vehicles, even though they didn't belong to the person driving them, and didn't return them to their real owners even after they learned of their mistake. Instead, the cops made a civil forfeiture claim and attempted to keep Cully's and Sutton's cars. A report from the Southern Poverty Law Center found that Alabama made $2.2 million in 2015 from stealing property through civil forfeiture. So the cops are fairly heavily incentivized to take property even when the owners are not guilty of anything. But according to alleged attempted rapist Brett Kavanaugh Alabama's grand theft auto operation is just fine. Writing for a 6-3 majority, it was the usual split, all Republican justices in the majority, all Democrat justices in dissent. Kavanaugh reduced the issue to one of timing. The plaintiffs, Cully and Sutton, wanted the state to provide a, quote, preliminary, unquote, hearing and force the police to justify stealing their cars. Kavanaugh said the state already provides a, quote, timely, unquote, hearing, said that all the plaintiffs wanted was to get their stuff back more quickly. He argued that the plaintiffs' arguments were just, quote, a backdoor argument for a more timely forfeiture hearing to allow a property owner with a good defense to recover her property quickly, unquote. As he does so often, Kavanaugh willfully missed the point. The plaintiffs want to stop the government from taking their property, not argue after the fact that the government should give it back. Remember, we're talking about cars here. If the cops arrest somebody and take their car, then find out later that the car does not belong to the person they arrested, the normal and constitutional and basically decent thing to do is return the car to its rightful owner. But instead of returning the cars to the people who own them, the police in these cases wanted to not only keep the cars, but then force the owners to enter into litigation against the police to get the cars back. That's not a timing issue. That's a mugging issue. Think about it. Yes, it's a mugging. What they do is they force you to give up your car by coercing you. Think about it this way. If the cops arrest somebody and throw them in jail, the accused is entitled to a preliminary hearing where the government has to explain to a court why the person should be kept in jail and denied bail. That hearing is different from the trial to convict and sentence the person. As a threshold issue, cops have to explain why they locked somebody up. The same constitutional rule should apply to a person's property. If the police jack a car, they should be forced to explain to a court why they're keeping the car instead of releasing the car on its own recognizance. Just pretend that car is Lightning McQueen. I don't catch the reference there, I'm afraid. It must be a famous reference from television or whatever. In dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, joined by Justices Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson, made a critical distinction between criminal forfeiture and civil forfeiture. It's one thing if the property involved is the subject of a crime, if the car itself is stolen, or if the car is a getaway vehicle that may contain blood or other evidence of criminal activity. One can understand why the cops might need to keep it. Criminal asset forfeiture can also be a form of punishment. For instance, in the unlikely event that a Wall Street type is ever forced to disgorge illegal or fraudulently obtained profits. Civil forfeiture, however, requires no crime. Sotomayor notes that 80% of civil forfeiture cases, quote, are not accompanied by any ultimate criminal conviction. She further argues that unchecked civil asset forfeiture can also lead to false pleas and settlements from property owners desperate to just get their stuff back, she writes. Loss of a car not only, quote, takes away one's ability to commute, but also imposes a barrier to buying necessities, accessing health care, visiting family members, pharmacies, grocery stores, hospitals, and other essential services, unquote. Given those burdens, low-income communities are also the most vulnerable to pressure from unchecked prosecutors who can use coercive civil forfeiture processes to extract settlement money from innocent owners desperate to get their property back. Kavanaugh was unmoved by these arguments, noting only the states are free to rein in civil forfeiture abuses through legislation, but the Constitution does not require them to. BS. That's his interpretation of the Constitution. It's worth noticing that the Republicans who claim to care so much about private property and protecting citizens from government, quote, theft, unquote, when it comes to environmental regulations or tax laws, have no problem allowing states to steal cars from innocent citizens who aren't even charged with crimes. For what it's worth, Kavanaugh is probably off at a Buffalo Wild Wings somewhere, wondering if Alabama could use its forfeiture funds to hire better offensive coordinators for their football program. Justice Neil Gorsuch seemed at least to struggle with his intellectual hypocrisy. Gorsuch wrote a concurring opinion joined by Justice Clarence Thomas, where he declared both the majority and the dissent to be right. Oh, he came down on the side of the Republican majority, of course, because even if both sides are right, Gorsuch usually thinks the Republican position is more right. And because this is Gorsuch we're talking about, he treated us, in his opinion, to an archaic, intellectually masturbatory discussion of the law of, quote, deodand, unquote, which I've now been forced to learn was the 11th century English equivalent to civil forfeiture. Properties that caused someone's death was forfeited, quote, to God, unquote, or, quote, the crown, unquote, but usually the local lord who needed some cash. Luckily, Gorsuch didn't seem fond of this particular 11th century law, probably because he couldn't figure out how to use it to hurt women or black people. So the legal upshot of Gorsuch's concurrence was this particular musing, quote, why does a nation so jealous of its liberties tolerate expansive new civil forfeiture practices that have, quote, led to egregious and well-chronicled abuses, unquote? In this nation, the right to a jury trial before the government may take life, liberty, or property has always been the rule. Yes, some exceptions exist. Perhaps it is past time for this court to examine more fully whether and to what degree contemporary civil forfeiture practices align with that rule and those exceptions. What I think Gorsuch is saying is that if some kind of carefully crafted lawsuit came before the court, Gorsuch and Thomas would declare at least some aspects of civil forfeiture unconstitutional. I don't know what that lawsuit looks like. In this case, Cully and Sutton were asking the court to impose a process, that of a, quote, preliminary, unquote, hearing on the states. But we already know that justices like Gorsuch and Thomas don't like the courts to do anything to proactively stop the states from violating the Constitution or civil rights, unless the states are trying to keep guns out of the hands of mass shooters. Then they think the Constitution gets violently angry. They were never going to go for this one. Theft of private property be damned. But perhaps a lawsuit challenging the asset seizure itself, instead of the timeliness of the hearing, would tickle Gorsuch's fantasy. I'm sure he could find his fancy, not his fantasy. He reserved the fantasy for the next sentence. I'm sure he could find something from Beowulf about the proper procedure for stealing a golden cup. In the meantime, the cops will continue to rake in billions of dollars from taking people's stuff. As usual, Republicans have rendered the Constitution impotent in the face of any two-bit criminal who happens to wear a badge instead of a ski mask. That was a terrific, sardonic piece, by Elie Mystal, the nation's justice correspondent and the host of its legal podcast, Contempt of Court. He is also an Alfred Nobler Fellow at the Type Media Center. His first book is a New York Times bestseller, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, published by the New Press. Elie can be followed at Elie NYC. This is a copyright of the Nation in 2024. Anyway, that's civil asset forfeiture shtick. Let us move on now to our second topic for the evening, is victory in Maryland over a rich guy who was helped out with huge quantities of money also, by AIPAC. Before I do that, I think I better share this one on Facebook since I forgot to do that. You'll excuse me while I whistle Moscow Nights as I'm sharing this on Facebook. It's been running around in my head for a while. Anyway, let me share the next piece. From the American Prospect, money misses the mark in Maryland. This one is tagline is, despite spending $62 million of his own fortune on the Democratic Senate primary, Representative David Trone lost last night to county executive Angela Brooks. Also Brooks is spelled just the way it sounds, Also Brooks. The article is written by Luke Goldstein, May 15, 2024. There's a picture, of Also Brooks, the county executive of Prince George's County, I believe. Also Brooks, Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate in Maryland, is seen at his campaign event in Silver Spring, Maryland, April 24th, 2024. She was Prince George's County executive. Angela Also Brooks pulled off an upset victory in the Democratic primary race for Maryland's open U.S. Senate seat, for which longtime Democratic incumbent Ben Cardin chose not to seek re-election. She defeated Representative David Trone, the multimillionaire wine merchant who burned through $62 million of his own fortune, the most ever spent by a candidate in a Senate race, and that in Little Maryland. What would have happened if the guy had been running in California? He probably would have spent $150 million. Also, Brooks will now face off against two-term former Republican Governor Larry Hogan in the general election, the key race in the Democrats' bid to try to hold their current Senate majority. That is a key race because Larry Hogan must be the last of the vaguely liberal Republican governors, vaguely progressive, Republican governors in the whole country. He was an opponent of Donald Trump. His governorship of Maryland is thought to have been a very good governorship, as good as the Democrats surrounding him. He tried to do something about January 6th, 2021. He tried to help. He was blocked, of course, by federal authorities for a while, so he couldn't send in any police. But he tried. He tried hard. Okay. So, Trone's blatant attempt to buy political office through an inescapable deluge of advertisements likely turned off many voters than it won over. If that happened, that shows the limits of money, of big money in these campaigns. With nearly 60% of the vote in, Also Brooks has a double-digit lead in a race where polls only showed her closing to a toss-up in the final week. By tapping his own personal wealth, Trone had outspent also Brooks by 9-1. Of course, the issue is whether for also Brooks, uh, she spent enough money to get her message out so people were aware she was running. That would have been key here. If he outspent her 9-1, and he spent like $62 million, that meant that what 6 times 9 is 54. 7 times 9 is 63. So, no, that was 9-1. So, what was it? 62. Let's say it was 63. So she spent $7 million. So she was outspent, okay, by 9-1, and that doesn't count the AIPAC funding. But she still had $7 million to spend. So she at least could get, okay, her message out. That's very different from a situation where, let's say, some candidate has 200,000 and they're running, for a congressional seat, and their opponent has 1.8 million. That's a 9-1 also, but it's a lot harder to win that kind of race with the 200,000, okay, than it is to win this kind of race when you have 7 million to spend, which is what she raised. So late spending could have pushed that even higher. Besides his own self-funding, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, and its network were the next largest outside contributors to his campaign, although this particular money spigot was turned off down the stretch, including when Trone became more critical of Israel's military actions in Gaza. Oh, Trone had a conscience. He had a conscience, and he became critical of Israel's military actions in Gaza. And that's why AIPAC shut off the external money down the stretch. And maybe that's why he lost, because he had some shred of decency left in him. Trone has for many years been a top, what they call, a minion donor, quote unquote, but AIPAC. A minion is the group of 10 people that are necessary to start a Jewish service, in a temple, for those who don't know. So he was what's called, a minion donor to AIPAC, and a vocal critic of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions BDS movement, against Israel. So he was very, very friendly to Israel for a long, long time. I guess he just couldn't take the genocide. Trone led in polling for most of the race, in large part because of his early advantage in blitzing the airways with nonstop ads. That may have led to oversaturation by the end. In the final weeks of the race, Trone ran 3 separate attack ads against also Brooks simultaneously across the state's 3 media markets. One veteran Maryland campaign strategist said he'd never seen that kind of barrage before. That's very interesting. Very interesting. That's amazing. Trone focused to a significant extent on criminal justice reform, criticizing also Brooks' record as a state prosecutor in a transparent attempt to siphon away black votes from her campaign. He claimed the issue was personal to him as a, quote, victim, unquote, of the criminal justice system, with strained credulity, since his experience consisted only of charges against him as a white-collar offender for business malpractice. This electoral strategy failed to pan out. Also, Brooks won by handily carrying 3 predominant black counties in the state: Prince George's, Baltimore City, and Charles County. Both Prince George's and Charles County are suburban counties of the Washington, D.C. area, for those who don't know. She also opened up a narrow lead over Trone in the largely white Washington suburbs of Montgomery County. That's why she was in Silver Spring campaigning. That's in Montgomery County. Black voters were projected to be about 40% of the Democratic primary electorate. Those areas will be critical for Democrats in November. And also Brooks, of course, will have to get those counties come November against a Republican, specifically Larry Hogan. And Larry Hogan was popular in some of those suburban counties. And I wouldn't be surprised if AIPAC doesn't come back and try to help out Larry Hogan in the fall. So I think also Brooks is going to have a tough race. Despite Trone's based attempts to claim the progressive mantle, distinction between the candidates were not chiefly ideological, although there was substantive differences between the two. Also, Brooks ran mostly on kitchen table issues such as expanding healthcare access, education reform, and creating better jobs. I noticed, however, she didn't run on Medicare for all, right, did she? Trone emphasizes criminal justice and some of his pro-labor credentials, which drew backing from some building trades unions. That's interesting. Pro-labor credentials for a wine merchant. That's pretty good. Later in the campaign, also Brooks ran a series of ads highlighting her support from the state's leading Democrats and her experience as a pragmatic legislator, whatever that means. She also benefited from a major ad campaign launched by the group Fight Corporate Monopolies, which went on the attack against Trone for his company Total Wine's highly monopolistic tactics to corner liquor markets. The ad emphasized Total Wine's, quote, dirty, unlawful, and corrupt business practices, unquote, including violating state anti-monopoly laws and pushing out independent stores. It also mentioned a lawsuit that Trone faced during the race from the Biden administration's Federal Trade Commission related to an ongoing probe into Total Wine's closest client, Southern Glazers. Total Wine was unwilling to comply with FTC orders. Oh, he bucked Lena Khan, not a good idea. The ad also described an incident in 2021 where Trone threatened a delivery worker at one of his stores by saying, quote, I will fucking end you. I will execute you, unquote. That altercation took place while he was a member of Congress, which raises questions about his continued involvement in his company, despite claiming he was no longer affiliated. Quote, I believe our Fight the monopolies ad against Trone, both in timing and in message, played a key role in changing the trajectory of the Senate race, unquote, wrote Faiz Shakir, who formerly at one time was with Bernie Sanders in 2020, a political advisor to the American Economic Liberties Project, whose political arm, Fight Corporate Monopolies, ran the ad. Trone's campaign suffered a series of missteps and gaffes down the final stretch of the race that hurt his campaign. The troubles began back in March when he accidentally used a racial slur in a congressional hearing. Oh boy, how stupid do you have to be? That incident got popular Representative Jamie Raskin to endorse also Brooks, as did the Washington Post editorial board. Trone also had to retract a characterization in one of his ads that called also Brooks supporters, quote, low level, unquote, presumably referred to many of her state and local endorsers. It brought a swift rebuke from her campaign, noting that she was endorsed by most of Maryland's U.S. House delegation, including former Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, as well as the state's other Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen and its Democratic governor, Wes Moore. Yeah. I think Wes Moore is a former athlete, isn't he? Also, Brooks Wynn also defies many figures in Democratic leadership in Washington who lined up behind Trone because of his financial prowess as a fundraiser for the party, because he could self-fund the upcoming race against Hogan, which would enable Democrats to spend their dollars on other close Senate contests this fall. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and his top lieutenants, Representatives Catherine Clark and also Peter Aguilar, Democrat of California, endorsed Trone. My God, what a bunch of freakazoids. Endorsed Trump, but they were not notably visible down the stretch, stumping for their candidate. Maryland State Senator Sarah Elfreth speaks at a news conference March 12, 2024, in Annapolis. Why have we suddenly shifted to Sarah Elfreth? Well, while AIPAC's preferred candidate was unsuccessful statewide, it did break through in a House race where it invested millions of dollars. State legislator Sarah Kelly Elfreth came out victorious in the Democratic primary for Maryland's 3rd congressional district, the safe blue district vacated by retiring Congressman John Sarbanes. Elfreth beat out a crowded field of 20 candidates vying for the spot. Though the race had mostly narrowed to a contest between her and former Capitol Police officer Harry Dunn, who defended the Capitol on January 6th. Still, Elfreth took only 35% of the vote, with Dunn taking 25% of the vote. The numerous also-rans provided much more than the margin victory. After writing a best-selling book about his experience and receiving much media acclaim, Dunn made the decision to run for Congress mainly on a democracy reform platform. In the end, he vastly outraised all his opponents by nearly 4-to-1 margin, raking in over $4 million. But what fundamentally altered the race was when AIPAC decided to intervene on behalf of Elfreth. Israel was not a major area of disagreement between the candidates in the race. Both Elfreth and Dunn expressed support for Israel and were not vocal proponents of conditioning military aid. Overall, AIPAC and its affiliated campaign spending vehicle, the United Democracy Project, that's their super PAC. Now, AIPAC is just a PAC, but the super PAC is the United Democracy Project. That super PAC was founded by AIPAC. They spent around $4.2 million to help Elfreth to victory. So Dunn spent $4 million in his campaign, and Elfreth spent some money in her campaign. I don't know how much she spent, but the UDP spent $4.2 million in outside money. The spending included a 6-figure ad buy in April, mostly just commending her record on climate issues and reproductive rights, which mirrored the, quote, red box, unquote, page on her campaign site. Got to explain, the red box tactic is when a candidate wants to communicate to a super PAC, which the candidate is not allowed to communicate to. So what they do is they take out a public ad and they have a red border around it, creating a red box, for that ad, where they provide information to the super PAC so the super PAC can support them by spending money. This transparent tactic has not been shut down by the Federal Elections Commission, on grounds that doing such a thing is not a violation. It's just exercising one's free speech rights. In the final campaign disclosure filing period, over half of Elfreth's individual contributions came from AIPAC's network. So in addition to this outside funding from the super PAC, over half of her individual contributions came from AIPAC people, including longtime heavyweight Republican donors. Some of those names were disgraced Suns owner Robert Starver, former AIPAC president Edward Levy, Robert Kraft's son, Daniel Kraft, and Colorado Trump bundler Larry Mizell. AIPAC went as far as to actually run a ground game for Elfreth by hiring several field directors and phone bankers for the GoTV effort, and I'm sorry for GOTV is Get Out of the Vote effort, an unprecedented effort by the PAC. Dunn's campaign decried the outside spending and tried to use it to their advantage. In the final stretch of the race, Dunn ran ads attacking Elfreth for taking dark money and accepting help from GOP loyalists. We have to note, by the way, propelling her to victory in the primary is not going to stop AIPAC, if they want to, from opposing her in the general, where they might want to spend some more money, but this time against her, in order to get a Republican elected. That's the kind of thing they do. Ultimately, it wasn't enough, and AIPAC's infusion of financial support blanketed the district with Elfreth's ads. It's still unclear why AIPAC got involved in the first place, if it wasn't because of a public-facing position on Israel from Dunn. A spokesperson for AIPAC claimed it was to oppose another anti-war candidate, John Morse, who was backed by Bernie Sanders. But Morse never raised enough money and ended up in ninth place with just over 1.5% of the vote. Dunn pledged not to take money from super PACs and to implement campaign finance reforms, which may have raised concerns for a corporate-funded super PAC like AIPAC. Well, that, is an inaccuracy there. The corporate-funded super PAC is not AIPAC. The corporate-funded super PAC is the super PAC that AIPAC founded, the United Democracy Project. So there was a little mistake in the writing there. Now pending an expected general election victory, Elfreth will take over for Sarbanes, whose legacy was working to keep big money out of politics by leveraging big money in politics. What a travesty, right? What a travesty. That's why we need the Dump the Corruption campaign to take off. We really need to take that off. Luke Goldstein is a writing fellow at the American Prospect. He previously worked as a reporter/research associate at the Open Markets Institute and interned at the Washington Monthly. So he's a pretty cool young guy, and he put together a pretty good piece, I think. So, let me go on to some further pieces here. Now, let me go on to my next topic. The next topic is the one about Aryeh Neier, my old friend. I suppose I'm covering this piece because he is my old friend, but I guess I can be allowed that every once in a while. Veteran human rights leader has seen enough. Israel perpetrating genocide in Gaza. Israel's, quote, sustained policy of obstructing the movement of humanitarian assistance into the territory, unquote, pushed Human Rights Watch co-founder Aryeh Neier to view the assault on Gaza as genocide. I can give a little bit of background, specifically Aryeh Neier when I knew him, okay, was an Orthodox Jew, okay, who often wore a skull cap, but who, okay, as I recall, was always friendly to Israel, okay, at that time. Uh, I can't remember whether he was specifically a Zionist. Uh, there were many of us, okay, at that time who were favorable to Israel and were proud, okay, of Israel, not realizing that the Zionism that Israel was practicing meant that uh, they were bent on expelling the Palestinians completely from Palestine. That is something I'm sure both of us learned much, much later. A widely respected humanitarian law expert who has resisted using the term, quote, genocide, unquote, for Israel's killing of tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza, a word used, quote, sparingly, unquote, in the international human rights movement, he noted, said Tuesday that he has concluded genocide is indeed taking place, evidenced particularly by Israel's blocking of humanitarian aid. Aryeh Neier, who co-founded Human Rights Watch in 1978, served as its executive director for 12 years, and also led the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, and the Open Society Foundations. Here I have to interject that Aryeh, after college, became a very close friend of George Soros, and worked very closely with Soros when he was at the the Human Rights Watch, and when he was at ACLU, and then, of course, in the Open Society Foundations, which were founded by Soros. He noted in an essay in the New York Review of Books that his organizations have used the term, quote, genocide, unquote, to describe few mass killings. Neier was not convinced of South Africa's genocide claim against Israel when it argued its case with the International Court of Justice in January, even though he was, quote, deeply distressed, unquote, by the human impact of Israel's relentless U.S.-backed bombing campaign in Gaza. The 2,000-pound bombs being used against Gaza's population of 2.3 million Palestinians were, quote, clearly inappropriate, wrote Neier in the magazine's June 6th issue. Quote, yet I was not convinced that this constituted the genocide. Neier wrote that he believed at the time that Israel's retaliation against Hamas for the October 7th attack had led in southern Israel could, quote, include an attempt to incapacitate, unquote, the Palestinian group, necessitating the wide-scale assault on Gaza where it operates. Quote, I am now persuaded that Israel is engaged in genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, wrote Neier, whose family escaped Nazi Germany as refugees when he was an infant. Quote, what has changed my mind is its sustained policy of obstructing the movement of humanitarian assistance into the territory, unquote. Israel's intent to blockade and to treat Gazans as, quote, collectively complicit for Hamas's crimes, unquote, has been clear since shortly after the October 7th attack, when Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said, quote, there will be no electricity, no food, no fuel, everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we act accordingly. The results of that policy, wrote Aryeh Neier, has been the deaths of at least 28 Palestinian children from starvation, according to numbers released by the Gaza Health Ministry in April. Quote, that number could multiply many times over if reports on food insecurity are valid, unquote, he wrote, citing warnings from U.S. Agency for International Development Administrator Samantha Power and World Food Program Executive Director Cindy McCain that famine has already taken hold in parts of Gaza. Under the, quote, complete siege, unquote, ordered by Gallant and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, noted Aryeh Neier, Israel has severely restricted the number of aid vehicles allowed into Gaza, where the population relied on deliveries from about 500 aid trucks per day before the current escalation. Trucks have been subjected to, quote, time-consuming and onerous inspections, with shipments turned away for, including items like children's medical scissors and maternity kits. Neier also noted Israel's killing of more than 200 aid workers and its persuading of international donors to stop funding the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, refugees in the Near East, for Palestine refugees in the Near East, and that is abbreviated, by UNRWA, of course, based on unproven allegations that dozens of its 13,000 Gaza-based staffers had connections to Hamas, as evidence that Israel is taking numerous steps to stop aid from getting to Gaza's starving population, while killing at least 35,170 Palestinians. Jamil Jaffer, executive director of the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, said in a response to Neier's essay that, quote, no one has more authority among human rights advocates, unquote, than unquote, the author. He said that in a tweet. The tweet said, literally, no one has more authority among human rights advocates than Aryeh Neier, who came to the U.S. as a refugee from Nazi Germany, led the ACLU, founded Human Rights Watch, and then served as president of the Open Society Foundations. Quote, Aryeh Neier is an immensely respected and not at all politically radical figure in the human rights community who can't be credibly accused of having any sort of obsession with Israel, unquote, said writer Abe Silverstein. Neier wrote that after working to protect human rights for more than 6 decades, quote, there is much about Israel's attack on Gaza that is deeply depressing, including how difficult it is to find a way to give victims any hope that justice will eventually be done. Quote, I myself hope that the frequent citation of international humanitarian laws as standards for judging the conflict will have a positive effect, unquote, he wrote. Quote, whatever else emerges from this war and whatever judgment comes from the International Court of Justice, ICJ, it is evident that Israel has done itself as well as its Palestinian victims long-term harm, unquote. The ICJ is currently considering South Africa's claim that Israel is committing genocide, having issued a preliminary ruling in January that the case was, quote, plausible, unquote, and that Israel must take steps to prevent genocidal acts. Although the ICJ does not have jurisdiction to adjudicate war crimes or crimes against humanity charges, wrote Neier, that's the International Criminal Court, by the way, quote, if it ultimately finds Israel has committed genocide, that will be a resounding defeat for a state. Excuse me, folks. That noise is coming from my television set, which I'm going to turn off right now. There we go. Although the ICJ does not have jurisdiction to adjudicate war crimes or crimes against humanity charges, said Neier, quote, if it ultimately finds Israel has committed genocide, that will be a resounding defeat for a state that was born in the aftermath of a genocide that many of its founders had barely survived, unquote. So that's that piece from the Common Dreams. Now, I still had one more piece to go, but I'm pretty sure that Dee has a stream now, at 9 o'clock, and that I should go there and help her. What I will do is I will postpone the article, A Make or Break Moment in Humanity's Perilous Journey, for tomorrow's show. And okay, I will treat it there. So I'm going to look at your comments now. And after that, I will go over to Dee's and help her. And there were a few comments, people saying hi to each other. And Lana said, oh, Robert says, I have bad news from California as CalCare is dead. Again, they managed to kill CalCare once again, okay, in California. Why am I not surprised? Why do I think that if there were dump the corruption campaigns run in California, there wouldn't have been this trouble with CalCare? Remember, dump the corruption campaigns apply both to federal and state levels. You got to get rid of the money in politics. If you want single payer, you got to get rid of the money, okay, in politics. I'm interested to see how state single payer is going to do, okay, in Minnesota, where Lana is active in the campaign there for single payer. I wish her luck. I certainly wish in Minnesota they pass single payer and be the first of the states in the country that passes single payer. But I can't say I'm optimistic because I know dump the corruption campaigns aren't going on in Minnesota either. Lana says, my son stole my car when he was a teenager in Maryland. They stopped him for speeding, took him home, called me. I had to pay $125 to get it out of the impoundment lot. I'm sure it's worth way more dollars now. Yep, I'm sure it is. And you lucky, Lana, because they only made you pay $125 to get your property back. Kay said, yes, Lana. Steve said, hello, everybody. Robert, nice to see you. Everybody says hi. Steve Wolfbrand says, Doc and Madeline know nothing about cocaine. Steve, that's right. I don't know very much about cocaine at all. Lana said, please hit the like button. Lana says they won't vote on it this year. Kay says, okay, I'm out of here and love you all. Thank you, Kay. I take it that includes me, so thank you, Kay. Lana says, anyone would like to be on the Zoom call Friday with one pair states, noon Eastern, please let me know. Send the email address. That's interesting. I wonder if I'd like to be on the call with one pair states tomorrow. Well, I have a lot to do tomorrow. It's a short day for me, so probably not. Unless you think that one pair states would be prepared to start supporting dump the corruption in all the states of the United States as a way of getting to single payer, because without a dump the corruption campaign, Lana, I don't think anybody's going to get there. I really don't. I'm very, very skeptical. I mean, God, with the likes of AIPAC and these PACs and the money they're throwing into these campaigns, when there's ever the slightest threat that something that's going to be good for the public is going to get through, oh my God. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to end this stream. Lotta says I'm not running the Zoom call. I figured you weren't. Who is running the Zoom call, by the way, Lana? Could be I know the person. Okay, anyway, yeah, I know it's one pair of states, but who is running the Zoom call? Who's the person who's chairing it? So Lana may not know that. Okay, anyway, have to look it up. I will send the email. Thank you, Lana. Anyway, I'm going to end the stream for now, and I'm going to go over to Dee's. So thank you very much for coming. Hope you liked the stream. I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll be doing the climate post and a few other interesting things as well. So thanks very much. Charlie Swenson. I don't know Charlie Swenson. I was hoping it was going to be Kip Sullivan. Anyway,